I want to start by saying something that took me a very long time to accept. Trusting people who are supposed to love you is not weakness. Walking into a marriage and trying to believe the best about your new family is not naivete. It is generosity. And generosity, I have learned, is not always returned. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone was sick, where people generally meant what they said. I think that's important context, because it explains why it took me so long to see what was happening. I met Daniel at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was quiet in a warm way, the kind of person who listens when you talk, who actually remembers what you said the next time you see them. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. His parents, Gerald and Patricia Harmon, lived about 40 minutes from the apartment Daniel and I rented together. We saw them every other Sunday for dinner. Patricia's roast chicken, Gerald holding court at the head of the table, making pronouncements about everything from politics to the best way to pack a car for a road trip. He was one of those men who always sounded like he knew the answer to every question, even when he was wrong. Patricia was quieter. She smiled often. She refilled your glass before you asked. For a long time, I thought she was just the calm to Gerald's storm, the soft counterpoint to his bluster. I'd learn later that her silence was something else entirely. For the first year and a half of our marriage, things were fine. Tense sometimes, in the specific way all in-law relationships carry a low-grade tension, but manageable. Gerald made comments about my cooking when we visited. He once told Daniel within my earshot that Maya seems like a city girl, which was his way of saying he thought I was too soft. I let it pass. I let most things pass. Then Daniel's company downsized. He wasn't the only one let go. 40 people lost their jobs that same week, but that didn't make it any easier to absorb. He was devastated in a quiet, private way, the way he handled most hard things. He'd come home, sit in the living room in the dark, and I'd sit next to him and just be there. That's what he needed. What we needed practically was to cut costs. Our rent was not cheap. Daniel's severance was 3 months. My salary as a dental hygienist covered our basics, but not with much room. We started running the numbers every night at the kitchen table, going through subscriptions, groceries, every line item. That's when Gerald called. He said they had the room. He said it made no sense to watch us struggle when they had a whole second floor sitting empty. He said family helps family.
He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Daniel, who had never quite managed to stop looking for his father's approval, though he would never have said so, looked at me with this expression that was half hope and half apology. I said yes. I helped pack our boxes. I told myself it would be 3 months, maybe 4. I told myself I was being generous. We moved into the Harmon house on a Saturday in March. It was still cold, that stubborn late winter cold that refuses to admit spring is coming. Gerald and Patricia had set up the guest suite on the 2nd floor, a bedroom, a small attached bathroom, and a sitting area with a love seat and a lamp. It was more than comfortable. I told myself I had nothing to complain about. The first week was fine. The second week, the small things started. Gerald knocked on our bedroom door early on a Tuesday morning, before 7, to ask Daniel about something in the garage. Not urgent, not an emergency, just a thing he could have asked at breakfast. Daniel apologized to me and went. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was nothing. Gerald had opinions about what time we turned off the lights. He mentioned, casually, at dinner one night, that he and Patricia were early risers, and that the house settling into quiet by 10:30 was important to them. He said it pleasantly, like he was sharing information rather than issuing a rule, but we both understood what it was. He had opinions about my skincare routine. He walked past the bathroom one morning while I was at the sink and made a comment about how long a person could spend in there. I was washing my face. I had been in the bathroom for 4 minutes. Patricia said nothing during any of these moments. She would be present, and then she would find something to do in another room. I noticed that she moved away from tension like water finding its own level, automatically, without drama, without staying long enough to leave a mark. I talked to Daniel about all of it. I want to be fair to him here, because I think it's easy to make him the villain of this part of the story, and he wasn't. He listened. He took my hand. He said his father had always been like this, that it was just how Gerald was, that he didn't mean anything by it. He said it so many times and with such sincere belief that I started wondering if I was the problem, if I was too sensitive, if I had arrived in this house with a chip on my shoulder and was finding evidence to confirm it. That's what living with Gerald did, eventually. It made me doubt my own perception. Not all at once, gradually, like water slowly wearing a stone. The worst part wasn't the comments. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it literally. When I walked through the kitchen in the morning, I would sometimes turn and find Gerald's gaze already on me, not passing through, settled, like he'd been watching before I looked up.
He'd move his eyes away smoothly, the way practiced people do. He'd pick up his coffee mug or his newspaper, and I would stand there holding my breath and telling myself I had imagined it. I hadn't. It was a Thursday in the 7th week of living there. I remember the exact day because Daniel had his first callback interview that afternoon, a real possibility, a company he was genuinely excited about, and the mood in the house was lighter than it had been in weeks. He left at 2. I stayed home, caught up on some continuing education modules for my certification, and went to bed early. I was tired in that deep way you get when you've been emotionally braced for a long time. I was trying to watch something on my phone before sleep when I noticed the Wi-Fi had dropped. This happened occasionally in the guest suite, something about the router placement in the house, the signal weakening on the far end of the 2nd floor. I went into my settings to reconnect. That's when I saw it. I'm not a technical person. I can't write code. I don't know much about networks, but I know how to read a list of devices connected to a home Wi-Fi, and I know how to feel when something doesn't belong there. The device was listed as CAM GR BDR2. I stared at those letters for a long time. CAM, for camera. GR, Gerald's initials. BDR2, bedroom 2. We were in bedroom 2. The phone almost fell out of my hands. I put it face down on the mattress and sat completely still for what felt like a very long time. The house was quiet. I could hear the radiator ticking. I could hear Patricia's television from somewhere downstairs, a soft murmur of a late-night program. I thought, you are being paranoid. You are so primed to distrust this man that you are reading things into a router entry. Then I thought, but what if you're not? I did not sleep. I lay in that bed in the dark, and I thought about every way I could be wrong. And then I thought about every way I could be right. And then I waited for morning. Daniel had come home the previous night after I was already in bed. I had heard him moving quietly in the dark, not wanting to wake me. I had pretended to be asleep. I needed to think before I said anything to anyone. Gerald left for his regular Thursday golf game at 8:15 in the morning. I watched his car back down the driveway from the bedroom window. Patricia was in the kitchen. I could hear cupboards opening and closing, the sound of the radio she kept on low during the day. Daniel was at the dining room table with his laptop, preparing for a follow-up email to the company from yesterday's interview. He looked hopeful. I didn't want to touch that hope until I knew something for certain. I told him I was going to organize some things in the bedroom. He nodded without looking up. I went upstairs and closed the door behind me. I don't know exactly what I expected to find. I think part of me hoped I would find nothing, that I would search the room and come back downstairs embarrassed by my own suspicion. I would have given anything to feel embarrassed in that moment. I started with the obvious places, behind the mirror on the dresser, under the bed frame, inside the decorative items on the windowsill, a ceramic bowl, a small wooden clock that didn't work, a framed landscape print that had probably hung in that room for 20 years. Nothing. 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 I almost stopped, but something made me look up. There was a high shelf along the far wall, a kind of shelf that exists in old houses, near the crown molding, too high to be practical, where people put things they want to display but never actually look at. On it sat a row of items, a brass candlestick, an old book with a faded spine, a clay vase with dried flowers, and a small decorative box, dark painted wood, that I had always assumed was empty. I pulled the desk chair over, climbed up, looked at the box from above. The camera was inside it. The front of the box had a small gap, disguised by the pattern of the wood, and the lens sat flush against it, invisible unless you were looking directly into it from above. It was pointed at a downward angle, at the bed. I stepped down from the chair. My legs were shaking. I took photographs of the shelf, the box, the angle. I photographed the device list on my phone. I went into the settings and screenshotted the device entry, the timestamp, everything. My hands were not steady, but my mind was. That surprised me. I thought I would fall apart. Instead, I felt something clarify inside me, the way a picture resolves when you adjust the focus. I did not touch the camera. I did not move the box. I put the chair back exactly where it had been. I went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea. Patricia looked over at me from across the room. She said, "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I said I was fine. A small headache. I was fine. She nodded and went back to whatever she was doing, and I sat there with my tea and my photographs and my certainty, and I called my sister. My sister Rachel is 3 years older than me. She has worked as a paralegal for 9 years. She is the person I call when I need someone who will not panic and will not waste time and will tell me exactly what I need to know. I took the call outside, in the backyard, standing near the fence. The March air was cold enough that I could see my breath. I told her everything in order, the device name, the search, the camera, the photographs. I didn't editorialize. I just gave her the facts. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Maya, this is a felony." I had suspected as much. Hearing it said out loud was different. It made it real in a new way. She told me that recording a person in a private space, a bedroom, a bathroom, without their consent is a criminal offense in our state, not a civil matter.
Not something to be handled with a difficult conversation over dinner. A crime. She told me what to do. Don't touch the camera. Don't confront anyone. Don't tell anyone in that house. Go to the police station today, before Gerald came home, and file a report. Take my photographs. Take everything. She asked me if Daniel knew. I said not yet. She said, "Tell him first, before the police. He needs to know what he's walking into." I went back inside. Patricia had moved to the sitting room. I went to Daniel. I sat down across from him at the dining table. I put my phone down in front of him, photographs open, and I watched my husband's face change. He went through the photographs one by one without saying anything, his jaw set. I watched him swallow, once, the way he does when he's managing something enormous. When he reached the last photograph, he put the phone down very carefully, like it was fragile, and he covered his face with his hands. He stayed like that for almost a full minute. Then he took his hands away and looked at me and said, "Tell me what you need me to do." That was the moment I knew we would be all right. Whatever happened after, with the house, with his family, with all the wreckage that was coming, we would be all right. I told him what Rachel had said. He stood up, got his jacket and his keys, and we walked out of that house together. We drove to the station in relative silence. Daniel asked me once, on the highway, how long I thought it had been there. I told him I didn't know. He nodded and looked back at the road and didn't speak again for a while. The officer who took our statement was a woman named Sergeant Torres. She was efficient and professional and did not treat us like we were exaggerating. She looked at my photographs carefully. She asked me specific questions. What was the device called? What network? Was I certain it was pointed at the bed? Had we observed any other unusual behavior? She asked about the cloud backup. Was the device connected to a cloud storage account? I told her I didn't know. She said they would find out. She told us to go back to the house and act normally. Do not move the camera. Do not tell Gerald he was under investigation. She explained that preserving the integrity of the evidence was important, and that if Gerald sensed something was wrong and removed the device, it would complicate the case. She also said, gently but clearly, if you feel unsafe, you leave. Evidence is not worth your safety. We drove back to the Harmon house. Gerald's car was in the driveway. He had come home while we were gone. We walked in. Gerald was in the kitchen, helping Patricia with dinner. He looked up when we came in and said something ordinary, something about traffic or the cold, and I looked at him and thought about that camera aimed at our bed, and I felt something settle permanently in my chest. Daniel answered him.
His voice was completely level.
I have always admired that about him, the way he can contain himself when he has to. We sat at the dinner table that night like a normal family. It was the strangest meal of my life. The detectives moved quickly. Within 48 hours, they had obtained the necessary documentation and were in contact with Rachel, who had connected them with a criminal attorney she trusted. The camera, they confirmed, had been connected to a cloud account registered in Gerald Harmon's name. There was footage. It had been recording for 11 weeks. 11 weeks. When the detective told me this over the phone, I went and sat in the bathroom with the door locked for about 10 minutes. I just needed to be somewhere small and enclosed and private while I absorbed it. 11 weeks. Our attorney told us that we could proceed with the confrontation now, not to get a confession, but to observe Gerald's response, which would be part of the record. He would also be served with formal notice within days. The attorney advised Daniel to be present. She advised me to be present. She advised us both to say very little. We chose a Sunday night. After dinner, the four of us still at the table. Daniel said, "Dad, we need to talk to you about something." Gerald's eyes moved to my face first. I've thought about that a lot since. His eyes went to me first, not to Daniel. And in that fraction of a second before he composed his expression, I saw something that confirmed everything. He said, "What's on your mind?" Daniel said, "We found the camera." Patricia made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. A small, involuntary exhale. And then went completely still. Gerald's face did not collapse. It reassembled. That was the word that came to me. Watching it. Reassemble. Like a machine that had briefly misfired, and then corrected itself. He said very calmly that he didn't know what we were talking about. He said there was a security camera in the guest suite, yes. For the safety of the house, he'd installed cameras throughout. Which was a lie that took about 45 seconds to fall apart, when Daniel asked why this one was hidden inside a box, aimed at the bed, registered to a personal cloud account. Gerald tried several more angles, each one smoother than the last, each one carefully constructed to sound reasonable. It had been there from before we arrived, and he'd forgotten about it. It was angled at the window, not the bed. The registration on the account was an old detail, meaningless. His lawyer could explain. Daniel placed my phone on the table. He pulled up the photograph of the device on the high shelf. The angle, the box, the gap in the wood where the lens sat. Gerald looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at Daniel. He said, "You went to the police. Your own father." Daniel said, "You recorded my wife in our bedroom. You did that to yourself." Gerald looked at me then. I held his gaze. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Patricia excused herself from the table and went to the kitchen. We heard her running the water. She didn't come back. We moved out the next morning. We called my parents that night and explained, not everything, not every detail, just enough. And my mother drove 2 hours to bring us back to the house I grew up in. She made up the guest room. She didn't ask more questions than necessary. She just opened the door. The legal process took several months. I won't walk you through every detail, because it is its own kind of exhausting, even to summarize. Gerald's attorney tried every available approach. They challenged the photographs. They challenged the network evidence. They raised procedural objections. But the cloud footage was irrefutable, retrieved by law enforcement with proper documentation, and Gerald's own account name on the storage was not something his lawyers could explain away. He pleaded guilty approximately 4 months after we filed our report. He received a suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, and a permanent criminal record. He was required to complete a court-ordered program.
He was prohibited from possessing recording devices in spaces where others had a reasonable expectation of privacy. The full details of the plea are part of the public record. The family fallout was substantial. Daniel has a brother, Marcus, who is 2 years older and lives in another state. When Marcus found out, he stopped speaking to Gerald for several months. He called Daniel to tell him he'd done the right thing. That phone call meant a great deal to Daniel, I think more than he's ever said out loud. Several of Gerald's friends from the golf club found out. Some stood by him, others didn't. His reputation in the community, which he had spent decades cultivating, was permanently changed. Patricia called me about 6 weeks after the guilty plea. She asked if she could speak to me privately, not through Daniel. I said yes. She said she hadn't known. She said she had suspected something was wrong in the house, a general wrongness she couldn't name, but that she had not known about the camera. She said she understood if I didn't believe her. She said she was sorry, not on Gerald's behalf, just her own. She said, "I'm sorry I was so quiet. I should have paid more attention to what I was choosing not to see." I believed her. I'm not sure I can fully explain why. It was something in the quality of the apology, the absence of any self-justification. She wasn't asking me for forgiveness. She was just saying the things she needed to say. I thanked her for calling. She and Daniel have a careful, limited relationship now. She comes to some things, misses others. It is not what it was. It may never be again. Daniel carries that loss quietly, the way he carries most things. People want healing to look a certain way. They want it to be linear. Hard thing happens, time passes, person becomes stronger. They want a before and after. A clear line between wounded and whole. It doesn't work like that. Daniel and I started seeing a therapist together about 2 months after we moved out of the Harmon house. His name is Dr. Osei, and he has a quality I can only describe as steady. He doesn't rush you toward resolution. He lets you sit in the complicated parts as long as you need to. In therapy, Daniel talked about things he had never said to me directly, about growing up with Gerald and learning early that certain things were not safe to notice, about how you develop a kind of internal blindness when the alternative is conflict with a parent who holds all the power, about how that blindness doesn't just disappear because you're an adult and you've moved out and you've built your own life. It travels with you. I talked about what it feels like to be surveilled in the most private space you have. I talked about the specific, particular violation of knowing that someone had watched us without our knowledge in our most ordinary and intimate moments and had felt entitled to do so. I talked about how long I had spent doubting my own perception in that house and what it means to learn that your perception was entirely correct all along. Dr. Osei said something once that I've returned to many times. He said, "The goal isn't to forget what happened. The goal is to make sure it doesn't live in your body forever." We are still working on that. It is slower than I would like. There are still nights when I am not in our own home, when we visit someone, stay in a hotel room, sleep somewhere unfamiliar, and I notice myself scanning the room before I feel safe. I don't think that habit will ever be completely gone. But Daniel notices it too now, and when I do it, he does it with me. We check together. That, I think, is its own kind of healing. We found our apartment 4 months after everything fell apart. It's on the 3rd floor of a building that was probably a warehouse once, all exposed brick and wide windows. The ceilings are high. The light in the afternoon is extraordinary. It costs more than we would ideally spend. Daniel took a position at a smaller company, less prestigious, better culture, and crucially, there when we needed stable ground. We make it work. We make it work deliberately, consciously, choosing it. I painted the bedroom walls myself, a deep, calm blue, the color of early evening. Daniel helped me on the second coat, and we spilled a small amount on the floor near the window and decided to leave it. A record of the day. Evidence of the choosing. I know every corner of that room. I know what belongs there and what doesn't. I know what the shadows look like at different times of day, what sounds the building makes when the heat comes on, what the window rattles like in the wind. It is entirely known to me and entirely ours. Some evenings I sit in there before Daniel gets home and just exist in the quiet, the ordinariness of it, the safety that has no asterisk. Gerald exists somewhere, continuing to exist. I don't spend much time thinking about him. Occasionally his name comes up and I feel the old, cold thing move through me, and then it passes. I used to wonder if I would forgive him someday. I no longer think forgiveness is the right framework. What I have instead is indifference, and in this particular situation, I have come to believe that indifference is more than enough. If you have read this far, I want to say something directly to you. You are not paranoid. You are not dramatic. If something in your gut is telling you that a space does not feel safe, that a person's attention is not what it appears to be, that something is wrong in a way you can't quite name, listen to that. Write it down. Trust it enough to investigate. And when you find out you were right, as I did, know this: acting on that knowledge is not betrayal. It is self-respect. It is the most basic form of protecting your own life. I didn't know the morning I reconnected to that Wi-Fi that I was about to change the entire course of what came next. I was just a person who couldn't sleep, holding her phone in the dark, reading a list of devices on a network. But I looked. I kept looking. I took the photographs. I made the call. I sat across from my husband and told him the truth. I drove to the police station and said what I knew. That is all it took. Not courage in the dramatic, cinematic sense, just the refusal to unsee what I had already seen. You are capable of that refusal too. And being underestimated, being watched and dismissed and assumed to be too soft, too trusting, too quiet to ever do anything about it, that is not your weakness. That is exactly where the story begins.